Hey guys, Ryan Gill here with HuntPrimitive, where we entertain, educate, and inspire. And on this channel, we do a lot of primitive build and or hunting videos just like this one. So if you're new here, do please consider subscribing. And today, of course, we're doing a build video, not a hunt video. If you want to watch the hunt videos, make sure you check out the rest of the channel. We got plenty of that stuff too. We are going to be doing a complete full walkthrough from start to finish, pretty much uncut for the most part, on tillering a primitive bow. Now listen guys, for years I avoided doing this exact video, and I'm going to tell you exactly why right now, and that is because everybody's eye is a little bit different when it comes to tillering, and you're going to have a lot of different people that are going to look at something and say, well, I think it needs something here, or I think it needs something there, and that's all going to be covered in this video too, because I'm going to tell you right now, nothing is ever going to be perfect, but you need to understand what the thresholds of what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, and then be able to implement that into your own primitive builds. Now, another reason that I avoided doing a video such as this one has been not only because everybody's eye is a little bit different, everybody's got different opinions, but I wanted to make sure that I'm giving the absolute best information possible. I am one of those people that absolutely hates if you don't really know what you're talking about, that you go run off and do a video on it, okay? So I am rapidly approaching 400 serial number bows, and I am also really fine-tuned into quality over quantity, okay? But what you really come to find out is 400 quality bows is a lot of bows, and I finally feel truly comfortable that I can share the information with you, not just because of the number of bows I built, okay? Anybody can build a whole bunch of bows. The difference is I do this for a full-time living. This is what I do. We build bows, arrows, stone points, atlatls, quivers, you name it, stone knives, all for primitive hunting. That is exactly what HuntPrimitive specializes in, okay? So I do this every single day. And not only that, but in almost 400 custom-made bows, I have had four bows that have needed warrantied. So I feel extremely confident that the information that I'm going to give you today is really sound information. And so truly believe the best place in the world to get bow building information or bows built is HuntPrimitive. So all that being said, I wanted to get all that information out there. Yes, of course it's an advertisement per se to let you know that HuntPrimitive is the best in bow making that there is, because I stand behind the product, but also it's the validation of the things that I'm about to teach you have real value. They hold real water. Okay, it's not like I've just, made 20 bows and now I feel pretty good and I'm going to do a video for you. I'm trying to give you the best information possible. If you don't get a bow from me, that's perfectly fine. I encourage people every day to build their very own bows, very own arrows, arrowheads, because that's what it's about for many people. So that's why I'm going to teach you how to do it. If you want to get one from me, you know where the website is, HuntPrimitive.com. Everybody knows where it is. If you've been following me, there's no secret to that. But thanks for following along. Let's get on to building the bow. Okay, I'm going to show you how the tiller tree setup works right now, okay? Obviously this bow, it's not clamped in, it's just set up on top, and I've got a long string on it, what we call a long tillering string. And I mark with a T, you'll notice here. That T is my top limb. If there's a whole nother video I have on the importance of choosing a top limb, I'll link that down in the description. It really has more to do with shooting over-spined arrows, but I'm going to drop it down in the description because this is how you're going to want to set your bow up to build. All this stuff really connects with each other within my channel, I promise. So anyway, the T marks the top limb. I personally like to put the top limb on the right-hand side every single time. This way I know you start flopping this bow back and forth and you're going to start seeing a lot of differences in the tiller, and we're actually going to look at that a little bit later. Okay, so I've just got like a standard, like a dog leash style clip, and it's on, this is just like a Dacron tillering string, and then like a really heavy braided cord that runs down to a pulley. You can't see the pulley, but basically on the side of the wood there's bolted on or screwed on a pulley. So the thing comes in under the pulley, so I can stand behind the camera with this handle and this rope. And then so what I can do is I'm going to be standing behind it. See how this is doing? The string's running down to a pulley. It comes up. These are all the measurements. We'll explain those later. And I stand behind and I pull on this to flex the bow. So if you want to build something like this, use your imagination, but this is how I love to tiller. In my opinion, best way there is to tiller ever. So you're probably going to see the camera shake a little bit because I'm not used to having to tiller with a camera in front of me. And so what I'm actually doing is I'm running the cord through the legs of the tripod so I can stand back behind you and tiller this bow. Alright, now for future reference, just so you don't wonder if it's, you know, the bow's left side or whatever. When I say right side, I'm talking this side. When I say left side, so we're all on the same page, I'm talking this side. Okay, so I'm behind you, and right now what I'm doing with this long string, I floor tillered the bow. Now we're not covering floor tilling and roughing out in this one, we're just talking the tiller within itself. Use the lines on the wall as reference. For many years, I never used any sort of lines, and that's fine. That's one of the things that helped me develop an eye for even tiller. But nowadays, given my professional position, I use lines that are drawn level on the wall, evenly spaced apart. And so what you can see here is the right limb, which is the top limb, just is a little heavier overall. So see where it pulls down? And the left side comes closer to this bottom line. You can see where I'm almost touching the bottom line. It comes closer by about an inch or so, inch maybe and a quarter. And so what we're going to do is we're going to remove some material off of that top limb. But I'm going to watch where the top limb bends because I want to know exactly where to take that material off of. And it looks as if, and we're going to back up and look at this, doing a fair amount of bending here and a little bit right here. So it almost looks like what I'll do is I'll take a little bit of material here and a little bit of material here out and watch that. I don't get too crazy with my tiller this early on, but I'm going to go ahead and look for some stuff to avoid hinges. So do you see that moving? I just got this one spot that's almost center limb that does look like it's actually moving a little bit more. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove some material here, and I'm going to remove some material here. So let's show you how I remove the material, and then we'll just get on with tillering out the rest of the bow. Okay, so when it really comes to removing the material, if I have a lot of material to remove, I'll actually use the draw knife like a draw knife. Now we don't have a lot to remove here, but I want to show you this. I'll start at the corners, and I'll pull up a couple curls like this. Okay, this is the spot that was bending a little bit more, so I want to stay away from that. I want to stick with just right in here. And because we have a lot of material still, I don't mind showing you. I kind of remove and almost start to round this ever so slightly. And the reason is, as I remove some of this material, now if we're making fine adjustments, don't use it like a draw knife. Don't remove curls, okay? I'm just showing you that because this is almost how I tiller as well, in the fact that I tend to remove and make it somewhat elliptical on the back here, or on the belly, I'm sorry, not the back of the bow. We don't remove anything from the back of the bow. But I do that because when I'm ready to really remove material here, it becomes easier to push it off. Now can you see how I'm pushing all these curls? Try to do some short ones so you can see the amount that I'm actually pushing off. I'm going to brighten you up, bring you in here a little bit closer so you can kind of see that. You can see how I'm shoving, I'm not cutting, I'm using the draw knife to actually push. And you can use it to pull. I much prefer, this is the same way I would use it to pull, but when I'm scraping, I grab it up here like this or on the side, and I push the material off. And I don't just constantly do it one spot, I kind of oscillate over top of these edges, and I'll keep moving like this. Okay, that's how I remove material. Now it's a good starting point for this section. Now when you start getting some like chattering lines, you'll notice this. You may not see what I'm talking about, but you'll see these lines that start to cut in with the draw knife. When you do it like this, now turn the draw knife this way, just like a little bit, one of the ways or the other, okay? And now you're going to go over those like this. So when you start seeing, what you're going to notice is like chatter lines instead of continuing, because what's going to happen, it's going to hit those, it's going to keep cutting those chatters deeper and deeper. We don't want any of that. Turn the draw knife sideways, and when you push over it, change the angle, and it'll glide over top of these like little divots, and you'll actually be able to shave the divots completely out of it. So by the time I'm done tillering this bow, it is going to be very smooth. Not only will it be tillered, but it'll be very smooth with no chatter lines throughout the entire piece. Okay? Now that you understand how I'm removing material, this is basically, unless I have to remove a very large amount, I'm not going to be using it like a draw length. I'm going to be pushing it just like I just showed you. And when it comes down to kind of the end, I'll go ahead and knock these edges down on the side, and that's fine. Now, I don't necessarily want to tiller this thing to be full elliptical, just a very slight amount. This way, when I do want to push it, it comes off the middle where I want it to. Does that make sense? Okay, let's move on. Let's go ahead and tiller the bow. Okay, so now, real quick, again, a couple things we're dealing with here is obviously we're running shadow lines. You're going to see from my lights, which I know can be a little bit confusing. So make sure when we're talking about watching stuff bend that you're not seeing the shadows. Also, you notice that the back of the bow is mostly in line with the top line and evenly spaced even with this bottom line. Okay, so these are set up obviously to gauge that the bow is level. In the handles areas of bows, you'll be amazed at how out of level, even if you think that they're square, that there can be a lot of differences here. So I have a simple wedge that I just cut off of a piece of wood. And if I say, you know, typically I'm not going to, like right now it's pretty good, but in the future, whenever I put a string on this, like this side's a little bit lower than that side, and it's not enough to really care about. A quarter inch isn't that big of a deal. But what I can do is I can shove that. You see how I can move? I mean, I can take that wedge and completely change how level that bow sits. So make sure that you have a little wedge, and all I ever need is one, because I can back it out and put it where I need it to be. So if you ever see me sticking this in somewhere, I don't want you to ask me later on what I'm doing. Or see that a bow might be sitting like this on the tiller tree at home, and you're like, well, you know, it's bending, but they're not even. How do you get this level? It's that little wedge right there, okay? So just kind of keep that in mind. Sometimes you'll see me use it, sometimes you see me may not use it. Okay, so we removed some material off of the right limb, and I tell you what, now it's like really consistent, at least in the amount that it draws down compared to the left limb. So we're really, really close. Now if you look at the left limb, now this is where the tillering process really starts. Right here, I want you to watch right here. Yeah, I would say somewhere between here and here. Watch how it works, okay, with the rest of the limb. I'll pull it a few times. Watch how that works, how it bends. You notice right about here, it's doing quite a bit of bending, okay, but it's not really bending right here, okay? So watch that again. This is really important. That is where we're going to take material off next. So now, despite the fact that we just took material off the other limb to get it bending even, we're going to play this little game of back and forth. So right here is where I'm going to remove the material, and then we're going to take a look at it again. Okay, so now what you may say is, like, how much material do you take off? That's a very viable question, and I know somebody's just to say, well, you just took material off, but like how much? Okay, so from the last scene, it's a little bit better. It's not totally there, okay? But for reference, I took 25 scrapes off of that section, okay? So now see how we're getting down to where, now I'm really down to the bottom line. Not the bottom line, but the line that's obviously below the one that we were kind of shooting for. That's about the line when I say I'm here to, that's to the brace height. And what I mean by brace height is if you were to actually brace the bow up with an actual string, that's about the line that it's going to reach. And pretty sure that that's 6 inches from the bottom of the tillering tree where the handle rests. So it's 6 inches. You got about 2 inches from the very top line down to the second line, and then 6 inches. And that's where your brace height's going to be. So that's really what we're shooting for before I put an actual string on it and brace up the bow. Now the limbs are bending fairly similarly, but that we do still have this a little bit of a stiff spot here. But what you're going to notice is when you have the long string on it, the tiller's going to be a little bit different because the string angle than when it's braced up. So what we're really shooting for is I want to be able to pull it to that line and potentially a little bit more and be happy with it. Happy enough, let's say. And then we're going to put the string on it. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to remove a little bit more out of here. Just a little bit more. And then we'll be ready to actually put a string on the bow. Okay, one last little check here. I removed some more material. Now you can actually see that bottom limb, the left limb, is actually bending slightly more than the top limb. And that's fine too. What we can do is just take over the whole course of the top limb, we can take, you know, maybe 10 scrapes, okay? And I probably won't show it to you after this point, but I'll go ahead and I'll take 10 scrapes off of the top limb, and then what we're going to do is actually brace the bow up, and we'll be able to tiller from there. Now, I will admit, I got to this point extremely fast. You have to remember, I do this for a living. I do it every day, okay? Now, I don't necessarily make bows every single day, but I work wood, I work stone, I work stuff every day. This is just what we do. So I'm inherently going to be a little bit quicker at it than most people. It may take you longer than a few minutes to get to the point where you're ready to brace the bow, okay? So now what I often see, and I need to really address this, is, especially if you get on the internet and start asking questions, people that are just starting out, what I see is they'll pull the bow about this far, probably not even, they'll pull it like here, and they'll say, how's the tiller look? And it's like, man, it's really hard to tell anything from flexing the bow for 2 inches. It's really hard to tell. Now, if you pull it like we did at the beginning, you pull it down a few inches, and if it looks like it's a little bit wonky, go ahead and fix it. But the real trick to this is you actually have to bend the bow. You have to try to bend the bow so you can see places that need wood removal. By just putting it up here and going like this and then saying, how's the tiller look? I mean, we really can't see. All we can do is make judgments on how the stave looks without any bend in it whatsoever, okay? You have to be willing to bend the bow to see how it truly looks. Now, once you get to that point where if you pull it to a certain inch point, say like here, and you really think that there's something that really needs addressed, you must address it before you pull further, okay? If there's minor things, like I've shown you thus far, you can pull past them another inch. Understand? You can pull past them. If the bow's not going to explode by going an inch past perfect, okay? So like I say right now, I had to pull it to this line and make adjustments so you can see, and hopefully you can see, the left limb is just about touching that bottom line where the right limb is about 3/8 of an inch up off of it. I can pull this this is fine. I can pull it even further, okay? But we're going to go a little bit at a time so you can see you have to pull it. You have to flex it if you want to see how it's going to bend, okay? So now that we're to this point, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take about, like I said, maybe 6, 8, 10 just long, gentle scrapes off of this top limb because we want to catch it up with the bottom limb. Ultimately, we actually want the top limb to bend a little bit more than the bottom limb, but I'll explain that later. I'm going to do that really quick, then I'm going to brace this bow. The next time you see it, this bow is going to be braced, and we're going to start tillering it from there. Okay, so I put a string on the bow, and I don't always low brace it. Like right now, it's super low brace. What I did was I grabbed a string that's just kind of hanging on the wall. I've got an assortment of them. And that's what I'll do is I'll put one on there. If it's a low brace, I'll go ahead and I'll pull it down a little bit, and I want to check the tiller a little bit. But I'm not afraid personally to just throw a full brace on it if that's what the string works out to be. I'm not that worried about it. If you are worried about your tiller, if this is one of your first ones, you're not to this point yet, you may want to get to a point where you just started a low brace, build a little bit of confidence, bend it a little, don't full tiller it, but bend it another 6 or so inches on this one, then tighten your string up. You're going to feel a lot more confident. But not only that, but at this point, once you get to where you're putting a string up on it, this is the part that's going to probably aggravate a heck of a lot of people, especially if you run something like recurves like this. Now's the time. You can start actually checking string alignment and see, does your string actually run somewhat down the center of your bow? And I don't mean the center of your bow in the handle. I'm talking like, do you have a tip that's really curved off to one side? And if that's the case, what you really need to do is stop, heat bend where you need to, twist it and tweak it. That's a different video for a different day. That's why a lot of times I tell people that are just getting started into bow building, don't monkey with recurves or reflex tips, because it's going to add a whole new level into it. Start with a straight bow. Get your idea of tillering down now, because you get a little bit of a tweak in a straight limbed bow and it's not that big of a deal. You get a little bit of tweak in one of these, it's still not a big deal. But if you're talking about really making a serious lifelong hunting bow, these tips need to not be kicked off to one side or the other, okay? It's very important. It took me years and years and years to figure out how to get this stuff perfectly aligned, and now I can typically get all of that sorted out before I even tiller the bow. But I am not afraid, I'll say this again, not afraid to get to a point where the bow is almost tillered and I've got a little bit of tweak in the limb. I'll stop it, I'll heat it up, I'll bend it, I'll put it back on the tiller tree, I'll check string alignment, I'll retiller the bow, because we want to make sure that it is right and it is perfect. If you don't want to mess with that, avoid anything that's got reflex and recurves in it to get it start. Okay, so we're going to throw this back up and we're going to look. Now, in that video that I linked below that talks about choosing your top limb and your bottom limb, the camera may not pick this up really good in this video. Okay, it's not what this video is for, but I want to show you. When you look down from tip to tip on this bow, the string doesn't align perfectly down the center the entire way, and very rarely will it ever do that. It's almost always going to pick a side. This is the way here. It shows you a lot better this way. See how the string, and this bow is flat, like I'm not kidding. See how it kind of walks itself from the center? I'm going to try to do this. I'm having a hard time following it, but you see, if you follow it right from the center, I'm trying to go straight up, straight up, straight up, straight up, straight up, and see how the string favors this side. You're going to know what I'm talking about. The second you pick up this thing that it's got a string on it, and you personally look down it, the string is going to want to favor one side or the other of the handle. And there's a lot of guys that will go to great lengths to heat this bow up and bend it so the string is perfectly down the center. What you've done is you've worked very hard to make that bow really picky in the arrows that it'll shoot. I will specifically, and you'll notice with every single one of my custom bows that I build, every single one, when you look down at this string, will favor the side that the arrow goes on. And I called this one correctly. I'm not afraid to redo it. This is the top limb, and that is the side that the string favors. Okay, you can see, this might be a good example here. So you can see the string here, you can see a lot more of the side of the handle here. On this side, you can't see much of the side of the handle. It absolutely favors that side. So that's it. That's about as flat as I can make it. And it favors this side, which means it's going to be absolutely perfect for the arrow to be on this side of the bow. And in that video linked in the description, we'll explain everything that you need to know about that and how that's important. If you fix it, you just made the bow more difficult to shoot. So take the side, and that's your top limb, is the side that the string favors. Your top limb, put a T on it. I already can look down a stave and tell you which side the string's going to favor even before ever putting a string on it. But if it doesn't, if I actually string it up and something happened and something changes, man, I'll cut that thing right, or I'll shave that out and I'll draw it and I'll just start tillering it from the other side. Alright, so now if you start looking at this, it becomes more difficult to gauge if you need to put that shim in. So now what I start doing is I start looking at the distance between here and where the line runs out, where I can't see it, and here and where the line runs out. That's one way to gauge it. Another way then too is look at the string line, and how is the string line as far as being parallel with this line. Okay, so this bow was really close to begin with. We didn't have to shim it very much, but I can still see, and I'm not sure if you can really still see it, but I can still take the shim and put just a tiny bit right in the corner. Not very much. And that's going to be just about perfect. It's actually a little bit too much at this point. Okay? Which that may also mean we just need a little bit off the bottom limb. Now, this is something else here people talk about, you're going to split the difference on your grip, and they'll say, well, where you're knocking the arrow, so you should be pulling it from here. When you put your fingers underneath the string, you're pretty much carrying most of the weight on these two bottom fingers, and so therefore it's underneath the string. There's a lot of argument into the difference between tillering the bow from here, say for maybe split finger, and here for 3 under. And I'm going to tell you absolutely right now, I make no changes. When somebody says, is it tillered for 3 under? If you can't shoot this bow 3 under or split finger, it's on you. It's not the bow, because by the time the bow's done, it'll shoot any way I send an arrow down it. I promise you. So what we're going to do is we're going to run this right off the center. Every time that you see this, we're going to be very close to center. If it's off one way or a tiny bit, it's not a big deal. People like to overcomplicate this and make it such an issue, and they think that they can't shoot a bow 3 under or split finger. We can shoot it either way, and it will not make any difference. I promise you, it is not the bow, it's the archer. Okay, so see, now we're getting like more drastic bend now that we've got some brace on it. So what you can actually see is the top limb is pulling past that middle line, but of course that's because that shim is in there. But the top limb does look to have a tiny bit more, and it's not a big deal. I mean, it's a very small amount. But let's take the shim out. Let's look at it again. And in this case, now it's pretty even. It's not a big deal. I can see that the bow, even at this point, needs adjustment. Realistically, the outer thirds are a little stiff. Okay, even maybe the outer 2/3 are a little stiff. But I'm not afraid to take it a little bit further. So now, right now, is a great time. On my tiller tree, you may not be able to read the numbers, but that very first line down here at the right there is 20 inches. And that's 20 inches that's measured actually from the top. So in this case, it is the back of the bow. Okay, so I got 20 inches measured from the top of this piece to here. That's where I'm at. If you get to 20 inches and your bow looks pretty good, roundabout like this, you're absolutely ready for a full brace. So now what we're going to do is we're going to hold, before we even make any decisions on this, we're going to full brace the bow. Okay, so we got the bow at full brace, which, just in case you're wondering, it's about 5.5 inches overall from, like, say here, the belly point. Okay, so the belly point's about 5.5 inches. You'll see there's about a 1/2 inch difference in here. Now, if you really look at this thing, we don't have to be super critical right now, okay? Really not that important. But if you're going to start looking at your lines between here and here, the distance between here and here, you're going to notice that I think it does need still just that tiniest little bit of shim, and it doesn't need much. Okay, and I think that that's probably perfect. And we may adjust. Yeah, I mean, I look at that and I'm like, that's right on the money. I can't make that any better. Okay, and actually the bow's looking pretty good overall. Now this bow is about 68 inches long. It's longer, a little bit longer than my standard. This bow is actually going to go to a 30-inch draw. But right now we're at a pretty heavy bow, but I'm shooting for the 65 to 70 at 30 inches on this bow, and that's 30 inches from the back of the bow, which is the top part of the bow that you see. So there's that 20-inch line, and I'm looking at it, and it's actually quite even. It's even enough. I can always perfect it, and I know I can. But see, the thing is it's not bent enough to really see where it needs to be bent. Now, one thing I am going to point out, when I'm standing behind the camera and I'm looking at it, the camera's slightly off to the right-hand side, because I have to pull through the tripod, and I'm going to try to fix that for you a little bit. Maybe you can see exactly what I see. But it's tough, man. I mean, if you're talking about trying to view it yourself and look through a camera at the same time, I tell you what, it's a totally different view. What I can see in the viewfinder of the camera, the screen on the back, is actually different than I see in person. But what I'm seeing overall, it's not that far off, but what I'm really seeing is that right limb looks to have a little bit more bend in it than the left limb. Now, be cautious of those shadows as well, because those shadows are kind of lying to you a little bit, and it's almost making it look like the limbs are further down on the outer thirds than they actually are. Okay, so what I'm seeing right now is I can pull this thing to 22 inches and it looks pretty good overall. Not enough for me to really fuss about, but I do think that we're still in the same spot that we were looking before, which is right about here. So now that we're to this point, I'm going to take about, I'm going to say 4 to 6 scrapes right out of here, and then let's look at it again. And I lied, that was actually 8 scrapes. It just felt right. So, alright, that already looks like it bends just a little bit better. And what you guys are seeing on that top limb too is maybe right about in the same area as where the bottom limb was, where, you know, maybe we need a little bit in here. So here's the thing, okay, if you run full on into this and start removing massive material in here, this is one of the most dangerous places to remove material, because once you've gone too far, the tension that's right here is irreversible. I mean, it really is anywhere else too. I mean, here's a really dangerous spot as well, but this is going to be one of the last places we remove material from if we have to. And then also right in here. These are your common hinge points, as people will have hinges either here because they end up cupping the crap out of it trying to tiller it, and they had like collateral damage from the tool they were using here, or they just dug too deep when they were chopping it out, or out here. And I've seen so many bows that end up whipped, tillered, and it's irreversible. And not only is it dangerous to the bow, but it makes for a really unpleasant shooting experience. I do not mind having slightly stiff tips. And that has never been a secret that I've put in front of people to say, oh, your tips look a little stiff in the outer thirds. And I'm like, good. Because that is also the same place when you start tapering these limbs, you know, in the side, in the profile, like here, let me show you. So when you're building the bow and it starts to taper into here, this is the place that has the most grain run out. When I lay out a bow, and I don't draw, I do everything by eye and then follow the grain of the bow, I'm mostly parallel in here. Maybe a slight amount of taper, but not a whole lot, okay? So I'm mostly parallel, and then when I start my real taper, it's about here. So when we start that taper, that's where the grain run out is the most significant, is right in here. Okay, so if we have this bending excessively, how many times that I have seen bows, not really mine, but other people, they're like, oh, it's not bending enough in the outer third, and then it blows up in the outer third. But that's because you have excessive grain run out from thinning your tips. That's one of the reasons when we take like the HuntPrimitive model or the Cherokee-inspired model, you know, any of these really contextual primitive bows, they're very parallel almost the entire way, and those are ones you can get away with them bending a little bit more at the tips, but you don't even have to yet. I like this 6 to 8 inch, maybe even close to 10 on a bow that's this long, probably not full 10 inches, but I like it a little bit stiff on these outer limbs. Okay, so we're checking again every time I put it up, I'm going to be looking at the distance between the string and the bottom line, and you can tell again that I stuck that little wedge just a tad bit too far. You want to be as consistent as you can possibly be. So that looks pretty good. Always remember consistency. Take 2 minutes to get it level, the same place every single time, as close as possible. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to be pulling this thing back, and I want to see, I'm going to pull it until I see something that's like, oh boy, I need to fix that. So I'm at 23 right now, not a big deal. Oh, you can see I'm hitting the the camera, I'm shaking you up. Okay, now that top limb, I can see, now's when I need to start taking a little bit. Let's go back and look at this, okay? We're going to take a little bit here. But overall, you're going to start noticing now it needs removal in here. This is what I was talking about before. Look at this first. The first, I'm going to pull it like 2 times. Watch there first. Okay? Watch that part first. I think we do need a little bit of removal on the outer third, not a ton. Now look at the center closer to the handle. And try to avoid again seeing the shadows. It almost kind of looks better on the camera than it does in real life. That's the issue again you're going to have with the camera. But absolutely in those inner thirds, she's a bit stiff. So what we're going to do is I'm going to take that little bit from right here. I'm going to take just, again, 5 to 8 scrapes right here. Actually, probably not even the full 8 that we did on this side. Probably do 4 or 5 scrapes here. And then I'm going to start digging into this a little bit because this area is so thick you actually have to remove a little bit more material. The further you kind of get out, the less the amount of material that you need to remove. So in here needs some more material removed. So we're going to knock this down, I don't know, maybe 15 or so scrapes just right in here on both sides, and then we'll come back and check it again. Okay, so now I've got the bow up here. I made those adjustments, and one of the things I kind of want to point out is just because the distance between the line here, don't always go by this. I put the little shim in, okay? After you make an adjustment, you may notice that one side has more bend in it than the other. Don't necessarily force the shim to make the string level. You have to constantly look at these distances. You're looking at symmetry overall when you stand back and look at the whole piece. And I know I talked about that string line, but I need you to look at symmetry over the entire piece. Okay, so what we can see here is the top limb, which is the right limb, looks like it's a little bit higher above the string, or above that bottom line, the string line that I would call it. It's a tiny bit, not much, but that might just be where the shim is. So instead of just jumping in and adjusting it, let's tiller it a little bit more and see. We're going to pull it right to 23. This is where we had it before. And I can see that it's still fairly even. Okay, so now I'm going to pull to 24. You got to be willing to really look at this thing. And you can't try to improve it to death. Okay, like I said, we're shooting for 30 inches on this bow if we reach the weight that we're waiting for. And I'm going to show you, we're not going to weigh it yet even. We're getting close to where we're going to weigh it. What I'm using is builder's intuition. I've been doing it a long enough time that I know that this bow is fairly close to the weight that I need it to be. It may miss weight, it may be overweight, and that's fine. If you want to weigh it as you go, that's fine. But at the end of the day, your tiller has to be the most important part, okay? So that's why we haven't weighed anything yet. If you go solely by weight, and I know that there is a theory, I have to talk about this a second, so you have to hang on with me, okay? So there's this theory that says if you want a bow that's 55 pounds at 28 inches, and you pull it to here, it's 55 pounds, don't ever pull it past that. You have to lighten it, which I would agree with. You need to do that. Now, because what will happen is if you continue to tiller it, now all of a sudden it's 80 pounds, you've compressed the limbs of the bow. Alright? And so now you've put damage into the bow, and then you're going to reduce the weight later. So that is true. That absolutely is true to a degree. It's not like exact to the number. So let's just say you want 55 pounds at 28 inches. If you're pulling 55 pounds here at 22 inches, you need to remove mass off of that bow because it's going to be so heavy by the time you get there, you will have damaged the belly fibers. Now, if you're pulling here and it's like 40 pounds at 23, buddy, you better not reduce it because by the time you finish tillering it out, you're probably going to be catching up. I mean, you're going to have to assume that your tiller is going to be perfect from this point forward, and you make minor adjustments. So that whole freak out of, well, I'm going to tiller it to be, if I want 55 pounds at 28 inches, then that means I'm going to tiller it perfectly 55 pounds at 20 inches. And then I'm going to remove total material, pull it down to 21 inches, and make sure it doesn't exceed 50. You're going to be chasing this thing in circles like crazy, and you're not going to be paying attention to your tiller. This comes with experience, okay? When you pull this bow down, you're going to have experience to know what it feels like. This bow's going to 30 inches. I'm not even going to put a scale on it until I'm about 27 inches, but I already know kind of how this bow feels from experience. So keep that in mind. Yes, if you got a bow scale and you want to put it on it to know, if you're not worried about the weight and you're just worried about making the heaviest, best performing bow you possibly can. Don't even worry about that scale at all. Just build the bow to be the best it could possibly be. Don't get so caught up in it, because this is what happens. A guy's going to come in here and he's going to pull this down. He says, well, it's overweight and I'm afraid of ruining the belly fibers. And he's going to have removed so much material and he's not even fully tillered the bow. If you're pulling it to here and you're actually trying to go to 28 or 30 inches, you're just not even close yet. If you've removed that much material, now if you have even a tiny hinge and you have to scrape more and more and more off of it, you're going to be down to a 30-pound bow. You're going to be very disappointed with the whole process. Okay? So you have to take some chances is what I'm saying. Don't take it as absolute rule that you can't ever go over the weight. You don't want to go over the weight by, say, 20 pounds. Might be a little excessive. Okay? So right now I'm at 24 inches. I've got no problem. Like right now, I look at the tiller. Me personally, I wouldn't recommend everybody does this. I'll pull it straight to 26 inches. That's not a problem. So I'm going to look at this. The tiller looks pretty good overall. I do believe that now it needs a little bit of work right here. Then we got the bend right here and we got the bend right here. Now we're chasing it. We haven't removed anything here. So now we're actually caught up. We took a tiny bit too much here, tiny bit too much here. So now we're going to check that spot. Now watch that when I pull it back. That's what I'm saying. You have to actually try to bend the bow so you can see where the wood needs to be removed. And I think that that's exactly what I'm going to do. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to remove it right here, and we're closing in on it. I don't think we need the shim, but remember we've used the shim the entire time. And because it was just the corner of the shim, we don't want to necessarily abandon it now, even if it throws our bottom line off, because we need to try to keep consistent. So if you've used the shim the entire time, you better put it back in, at least until you decide if you don't need it, but you probably do. Okay, so now I'll go ahead and check it. I'll pull it back to 26. It's not too bad overall. That's looking pretty good. That outer third is a little bit stiff, but like I said, I don't mind a little bit stiff outer third. Okay, now what we're going to do is take a 27 right there, and now we're almost to that bottom line. Alright, so that bottom line, from how I've laid out my bows, that 12-inch line is when I'm running a 6-inch brace height, give or take 5.5, 6-inch brace height, and then I pull down to 28 inches, which I'm not there, I'm 27 inches. My string should be right on that line. And so what you can see in this is the right limb, the top limb, doesn't bend quite as much as the bottom limb. And that's because obviously we've removed more material. So what I'm going to do is anywhere that I think I can remove material off the top limb, which I can take a little bit more here, and then it looks pretty decent here overall. I'm just going to remove a little bit more into here, but definitely a little. This right here is not going to give us a lot. That's just, I'm just trying to play a little bit of catch up on the outer third, which again, I don't mind being stiff. But we're just going to take more or less some overall, watch it again here as it bends. We're going to take a little bit off that outer third, and then kind of on this inner spot right here, just a little bit more. Okay, so we just made those adjustments, and you'll also notice I just put the scale on the bow. Okay, so now what we're going to do, because I'm going to shoot for 30 inches on this bow, if it weighs enough. If not, we'll knock the weight down and stick with 29. But we're going to go ahead and pull 26 just to be sure that our corrections were okay, which it is. And I'm going to let back up, and now I'm going to pull it to 27. Okay, and now I've just checked the weight. The weight is 62.54 pounds, 62.5 pounds. You can't read it on there, it doesn't matter to you. It's actually upside down. I'm good at reading upside down. So it's 62.5 pounds at 27 inches. So let me tell you right now, I'm about ready to knock the camera down. 62.5 pounds at 27 inches. If I am shooting for 65 to 70 pounds at 30 inches, that is a good place to be. That means, because you have to remember, even once we hit that, I always say shoot for 70. If we got a 65 to 70, I'm shooting for 70. Now the reason for that, of course, is that gives me a little bit of room for final adjustments, because after this bow stabilizes, it's been shot, it's like naturalized with its, if you have to make steam corrections, heat corrections, it loses moisture, gains moisture in different spots, it's going to take a little bit of time for this to naturalize out. And then also, you shoot it a few times, or just even really flex it a lot, and you're going to learn a lot about that bow, and you might need to make adjustments later on. And if you don't have the weight to do it, well, now you just came in underweight. Okay, so 62.5 at 27 is going to be about perfect to me, because now I've got a couple pounds per inch I can actually lose, because I only really need to get another 3 pounds in the next 3 inches, which is easy. That's super easy to get to the weight that I need to get. So this is what I was trying to say earlier. If you look at this and say, well, I'm trying to hit 60, let's just say I'm trying to hit 65 pounds, and I'm going to gain an average of 3.5 pounds per inch or 4 pounds per inch. I'm way overweight. I need to reduce it. I'll tell you what, you're going to mess the tiller up, and you're going to end up with a 55-pound bow. Okay, so you're not in a bad position. So that's 27 inches. The top limb is now just starting to be bending slightly more than the bottom limb. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and take it to 28 inches. And it's looking good overall. And that top limb is just bending a little bit more. I want you to really watch that. Look at the right limb, the top limb. I pulled 28, and it's not much. I bet you it's a 1/4 inch. It's bending further. Now let's talk about why this is important. I do this specifically. People will say, now this is when they talk about laying out a bow to be symmetrical. When I run a center line on a bow, I run the center line of the grip. Okay, so where the arrow goes is actually a little bit asymmetrical. This is how I like to lay out my bows. If you want to do it different, don't give a hoot how you want to do it. If you want to make the bottom limb shorter, that's fine. I like a symmetrical looking bow. Even within a symmetrical limbed bow, where the limbs are essentially, there might be slight differences, but the limbs are essentially the same length. By the time the bow is fully tillered, I want the top limb to be I want it to come down about 1/2 inch further than the bottom limb. Okay, so say that again here for you real quick. When I'm pulling this bow down and it's fully tillered and it's totally done, I want the top limb to bend about 1/2 inch, give or take. Might be 3/8, might even be close to a full inch. Full inch is really starting to push it for me, but 3/4 I'm okay with. 1/2 inch is about ideal. 5/8 still good. Somewhere in that neighborhood. And somebody would say, well, your limbs are going to be out of time. The bow's never going to shoot right. Totally incorrect. It'll shoot fabulous every time. And you know why? Because I do it all the time. The purpose of this is the bottom limb does get stressed more when you shoot. And it may not always be your shooting style, the fact that you're pulling with your lower fingers a little bit more. But remember this, when you brace the bow, whether you use a bowstring or you use step through, any of these, even push-pull, which good luck push-pull at a 65 to 70 at 30, you're probably not going to be able to do that. But every time that you brace this bow, the tendency is to overflex the bottom limb when you put the string on. So what happens is that bottom limb gets really overflexed a little bit more. And that's why when you see bows that fail, most bows, unless there's a big knot or crack problem or just horribly tillered, but when you do see a bow fails, it's typically on that bottom limb, because that bottom limb is taking a lot of abuse, especially during the stringing process. So what I do is I try to make that top limb bend about 1/2 inch more, because inherently then the bottom limb is a little bit stiffer. Now as we abuse that bottom limb over time, it'll catch itself up. And if you really build bows over a long period of time, what you're going to notice is you're going to take a bow and it's going to be perfectly looking tillered, and you're going to hunt with it, and you're stringing it and you're unstringing it, and you're hunting with it and you're stringing it and you're unstringing it, and over time the bottom limb is going to start bending a little bit more. That's what you're going to see. Now, if you were always stringing it from the top limb, I would say make that bottom limb bend a little bit more. That's the difference. That's the difference in having a bow that's going to keep its tiller or even its tiller out perfectly over time. And I'm talking over time, like over months and even potentially years. Now, eventually it will stop. It won't just continue to do that forever. So what we're trying to do is preload a little bit of like extra flex in the top limb to make up for all the abuse that we're fixing to put on this bottom limb. That's where that's coming from. That's coming from my experience of being a hunter and using this stuff pretty much every day. Okay, so now we're going to pull this thing 28, and it's looking pretty good overall. Then we can get to a point, I'm going to go ahead and just pull her 29. Okay? And that's really pretty good. I mean, you can always perfect it, right? But that's 29 inches. All right, so let's put the scale on it now. Keep in mind, I like to actually get overweight. And I know the whole, oh, you're going to overdraw and you're going to hurt the belly fibers. No, I want to be able to fine tune this thing after it naturalizes. So I kind of want to be, if I get to this point and I want to be somewhere between 70 pounds and 75 pounds at 30 inches. So at 29 inches, I'm at 67 pounds. So you see how we went from that at 27? As you even flex this, what it's doing is it's compressing these belly fibers a little bit more. I forgot to mention this. It's really important. So what? We're at 67.36 pounds at 29 inches, but we're at 62 here. So you'd be like 62, so 63, 64, 65, 66, 67, 5. Well, that's only 2.5 pounds per inch. But you know what else we did? We didn't even remove material. But you know what we did do is we compressed those belly fibers more. So that's what's you're actually going to lose a little bit of weight just by doing that. So I am shooting for 65 to 70 pounds at 30 inches. I'm already at 67. So if I'm right about 70, which is going to be about perfect, at 30, that gives me about 2 to 3 pounds I can lose in that window by the time I scrape and sand it down. We're really looking at hitting this thing right on the nose. Okay? So 67 pounds, we're about perfect. And we're really closing in on it. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at it one more time here. And I didn't really even look at it at 29. Top limb bends a little bit more. Okay. And I feel pretty good about it overall, except for the fact that it is a little bit stiff on those inner thirds. Those outer thirds, you might say, are a little bit stiff as well. And they could be, but remember, I like a stiffer outer third. So I'm really close. Now we're in that section of, do we remove more material off of this bow and risk coming in underweight, or do we go ahead and take it to the 30-inch mark? Okay, the bow is probably perfectly fine to take to 30 inches. But you can also see, if you look at our string line, very important, look at our string line, the top limb is now to the point where it is on the string line and the bottom limb is actually off the string line. You see that? We actually have some space in between here we don't have over here. Check to make sure that your bow isn't tilted first. Nope, it's still there. Check to make sure that your shim isn't too far in. No, it's really not. It's right where it was every other time. So then what that tells us is, yes, remember, I do want the top limb to bend a little bit more. But if we pull it to 29, that's actually a little bit too far now. Okay? So I'm going to explain this to you really quick, because this is already a ½ inch stiffer than this, but when it's full drawn, this is about a ½ inch or so more than this. So now by the time we're at it, you got about an inch more flex in that top limb. Okay, watch that one more time. Whoop, hitting the tripod. Okay, you get about an inch more flex now in that top limb. So where do we really need to take it out of the bottom limb? Because that's what we need to do right now. Well, the inner third, look at that inner third closest to the handle on the bottom limb. that's where we need to take the material out to even these limbs up. So now that's where I'm going to go ahead and take that out of quick. Alright guys, now this is my favorite part, okay, so really pay attention on this one. Alright, so we were at 29 inches, we made our slight adjustments, right? Okay, so now the top limb does seem to be bending slightly more, which I like. We discussed why that is. I'm going to go ahead and take it, that's 29 right there. Let's really look at that a second. Let's break that down. Looks pretty good overall. There's always room to perfect it, right? There's always going to be room. You're never going to be perfect, and I'm going to tell you why you're never going to be perfect here in a minute. It looks good. So now, last inch, I'm going to take it a half an inch, or the last little, I need to get 30 inches. So we're at 29 on that one. I just hit 29 and a half. Now, as a little note, I do need to, you probably can't see it from the camera angle, but it's really close, actually, about dead level here. I thought we were maybe a 1/4 inch lower, but we're not. So actually, because the measurements here to 30 inches is measured from the top of this, that is actually level with the back, and the bow might be 1/8 of an inch lower. It's insignificant, quite honestly. Okay, but so that's where the measurement's taken from. If you had a bow that had a small handle on it, and the handle maybe only came to here, and let's just say the end handle was only 1 inch thick instead of 2 inches thick, came to here, well then you need to pull it to 31 inches if you're going to 28. If it's a half an inch down, then you would need to pull to 30 and a half. Does that make sense? Just do the math on it. Shouldn't take rocket science to figure that out. Okay, so the top limb looks like it's bending a little bit more, which it kind of is. That's 29 inches, but overall, that's where I want it to be, and it looks pretty good. And we did 29 and a half. That's 30 right there, okay? It's pretty solid overall. And I don't like to hold them at full draw, but it's important during the building process. I don't want to sit here and hold it all day, but I want to put some stress on it. Hold it, 2-3 seconds like somebody that holds and draws would shoot. And I would honestly say that the top limb does bend a little bit more, but that's ideal in this situation. Now to me, this bow is about maxed out now in the draw length, because it's about 68 inches, 69 inches maybe. It's probably 68 knock to knock, and we're pulling 30 inches on it. So ideally, really I want to be a 29 inch draw on a 68 inch knock to knock. But this one's, I don't mind that little extra inch fudge here or there. I'm okay with that. But to me, in order to be safe, now we could probably take this dang bow down to 31 inches, maybe even 32, and it would survive. But we're talking long-term survival on this bow. 30 inches, that's as much as this bow needs to draw. And the tiller looks pretty good. Now if you want to stop, put that on pause and go back, like actually go back and put this thing on pause, what's going to happen is you're going to look at this and be like, oh no, I got him, it needs a little bit more here, it needs a little bit more here. This is my favorite part right here. This is gut check time. When you see people that show a bow at absolute full, remember, this is not laminated stuff with fiberglass and you're putting it on a form and it's absolutely level. This is a tree. This tree grew not perfectly level. Even the best stave you're ever going to get, it's going to have a little bit of something in it. Okay? We tillered it from one side. Now normally, I don't wait till I'm all the way at full tiller to do this. I'll do this about 20, if I'm 30 inches, I'm going to do it about 27, 28 inches. I didn't show you this because it's a surprise part for y'all. I actually did do it, but I didn't show y'all. We flipped the bow around. Now the top limb's over here. This is why chasing perfect tiller is never going to happen, okay? It might be perfect as you could see it from one side, but if you flip the bow around, it's not going to be perfect anymore, and I promise you. Very rarely, maybe 1 in 75 or 100 bows will be perfect. Now that's not too far off. Now what did we see on this? Go back and remember the top limb, which is now the right limb, right? Was the left limb. The top limb was bending a bit more, right? Now, as we bend this, the top limb looks like it's got more stress in it. Okay, and it actually looks like it's got a little bit of a flat spot right here. Isn't that crazy? Watch that again. Let's see if we can see that. And that thing looked like it was bending too much. Now, all of a sudden, It's got a flat spot, right? That's my favorite part of this whole thing. Now, if you draw this thing back and it is absolutely wonky, then I'll tell you right now, you need to fix it. That's not wonky, but it's not perfect. Do you understand what I'm trying to say here? This is what I'm really trying to convey. Everybody talks about perfect tiller this and perfect tiller that. You need to have a tiller that's stable. One that looks good on both sides. It's never going to be perfect. If you chase perfection, what's going to happen is the bow that you're trying to make to be 65 to 70 pounds is going to be about 35 pounds, and you're going to be very unhappy with it, and it's still not going to be perfect. You're going to monkey with it, and you're going to improve it to death. I put my name on this. I put my pride on this. I will absolutely replace it. This is the best bow that this stave can ever make. I promise you that 100%, and I stick everything by it. And I honestly have the warranty and the track record to back it up. If you look at this and say, I could make the tiller better, I say, man, go for it. But you're going to beat that bow to death, and it's going to be a piece of crap bow when you're done with it. So look at it again. Now remember, top limb is now on the left-hand side, about 30 inches. See the difference here? So now we'll spin this around. If you want to go back and even pause it, you can pause it and pick it apart and be like, man, Ryan sucks at tillering. I just watched his whole video and he sucks. Right? You can do that. Flip it around the other way. You're never going to find the same bends in the same places. You understand what I'm saying? Stop perfecting it to death. So what we just did is we walked this entire thing down. Let me throw it into this tiller for you. And I'm looking at, again, 65 to 70 pounds. Now, remember this too. We just basically got done flexing and abusing this bow. So it's going to be a little softer than it would be if we let it sit now overnight. You let it sit overnight, and it's actually going to gain about a pound or two because we're going to give it a chance to rest. Right now we're at about, it's 68.5 pounds. So that's right in, I would love 70. I was shooting for 70. Okay, I was shooting for 70 pounds. So I had a little bit more room to hit my 65 to 70 pound weight range on here, but it's still good. So we're 68, almost 68.5 pounds. It'll be 69 pounds, I bet you, in the morning because it gained a little bit, and we'll lose about a pound by scraping the edges, and about another pound by sanding, and quite honestly, we'll be right in that same area. This is why I tell people also, but you know what, too, the amount of humidity that's in an area per climate, you're going to gain or lose another couple pounds anyway. You could take it to a very dry climate, and you might gain 5 pounds than you would here in the east where it's really humid, or even the wintertime in Florida, it's going to be a little bit stiffer when it's drier than it would be in the summertime. So you're going to have these fluctuations all the time. Don't beat yourself to death over it, okay? But this is the biggest thing. And honestly, I do think it takes a certain amount of bravery to stand in front of the camera, in front of everybody to see, to say, you can make the tiller as perfect as you want, and you flip that bow around. So when you get on, you see everybody that comments online about, well, your tiller needs to be this here, it needs to be this here. You ever notice I don't do that. I don't ever get on and tell somebody how to fix their tiller. Because I tell you what, I don't care how perfect that tiller looks. Flip that bow around and let's look at it again. It's not going to be. And that's the thing. What you need to understand is what is okay in tiller and what's not. We don't have any hinges in this bow. When somebody says if it bends a little bit more, no, it's not a hinge. You see it. Okay? There's no hinges in this bow. I'm going to pull it back again for you. I want you to really look at this. And as I stand back and I pull this bow for you, I'm going to talk about what I see in this bow. And I'm going to pull 29 just because I want to hold it here a second. But the top limb bends about 3/8 of an inch more than the bottom limb. Okay? Overall, it's pretty nice. But see, now we're going to take a little bit of time. We're going to let the bow stabilize. We're going to scrape it. We're going to sand it. And we're going to put it back on this tiller tree. And we're going to adjust it ever so slightly. And I guarantee you we're going to land right in that 65, 66, 67 pound range for the customer. So I did come in about 2 pounds underweight, which is not too dang bad. overall, not bad. I like my outer thirds a little bit stiff. I don't want my inner thirds hinging. Could they lose a little bit more? They could, if we had weight to lose. Let's just say that we were at 67, but the customer wanted 60 pounds, you know, say 60 to 65. The first place I would go, I'm going to go to the inner thirds. Okay? I'm not going to monkey out here. I'm still not going to do that. Because we're a little stiff here, I would take it out, but we don't need to. The bow is going to be perfectly stable the way that it is. Okay? And just because you say, well, it's not absolutely perfect, again, flip the dang bow around. It's never going to be perfect. But right now, it's as perfect as it ever needs to be. And the true test in all this is how it is when it's stable. Let this bow sit for about a week. Scrape it, sand it, get it about finished. Let it sit for a week. Completely naturalize and relax. Then check the tiller. If the tiller's off, you need to adjust it at that point. That's when you adjust it. You need to shoot the bow a little bit. You need to, put a little bit of shock in the limbs. Let it see how it feels, okay? All of this stuff is going to make this bow naturalize. Then you check it. But I can still guarantee you, if you are trying to chase the absolute perfect tiller on both sides, it will absolutely never happen. Okay? So that's one of those things where I always tell people, check your ego when it comes to tiller and bows. Because you might think that it's perfect, somebody else is going to tell you it's wrong. And then if we took that picture and we flipped it around, it's going to be almost embarrassing. Okay? So hopefully you learned something about the tiller today. What I probably need to do is another tillering video of showing you things to not tiller, how to not look, but essentially it would cause me to ruin a bow and I don't really want to do it. This is how you should be looking at tillering a bow. This is plenty sufficient. This is a good bow. I'll stick my name on it any day of the week. By the time it's finished out, I'm going to have my turquoise inlay on this bow, and it's going to have a 5-year warranty on it and free repairs for life. There will be no problems with the bow. I am 99.5% sure. Alright guys, thanks for following along. Hopefully you learned some stuff about tiller and bows today, and hopefully it maybe puts you at a little bit ease that things don't necessarily have to be absolutely perfect as everybody else says. Take it with a grain of salt. Enjoy the bow building process. Remember, your first one's not going to be your best one, and your last one's not going to be your best one either, because you're going to do better ones in the future, okay? So get to bow build and have a good time. We'll catch you on the next adventure.